Well, hello everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Classic Gamer 74. I am your host, Anthony Gamer, and in today's episode, we're going to have our third installment of Arcade vs. NES. Before we get started today, I want to apologize to everybody. I know I was planning on doing some live stuff and a few other things this week in celebration of the 6th anniversary of the channel, but unfortunately my health has kind of taken a turn. This week I was not feeling well. I'm actually on medical leave from work, so hopefully once I get started to feel consistently better, we'll do some of those things that I had spoken about. But I would appreciate if you put me in your prayers and positive thoughts. Would be greatly appreciated, so thank you. Okay then, so in our previous two episodes we have discussed how arcade games have looked when they were ported out to the NES. And in the past, game systems prior to the 8-bit revolution, you could see that some of the games, they did as good as they could a lot of times with some of the ports. Other times, not so much, but we're not going to get into that. So far, it looks like many of the games that we've looked at have been pretty spot on and did as well as they could for the amount of memory that was available to them. So we're going to continue on with that. So without further ado, let's get into the games. This was released in arcades in 1983 by Taito. In this game, the player assumes the role of a spy who infiltrates a building filled with elevators. He must collect secret documents from the building and traverse the 30 levels of the building using an increasingly complex series of elevators. The player is pursued by enemy agents who appear from behind closed doors. The player must outwit them via force or evasion. Successful completion of a level involves collecting all the secret documents and traversing the building from top to bottom. In the lower floors of the building, the elevator systems are so complex that some puzzle-solving skills are needed. So, quite an interesting game in its time. Unfortunately, I didn't play it back in the day. I don't think any of the arcades I went to had it. But playing it later on in life, I really enjoyed this game. It's a very complex game that really keeps you coming back time and again. So in 1985, the NES or the Famicom got their own port of elevator action. As you can see, it fits the original game to a T. The controls are very fluid. The game is pretty much identical in so many ways. Really an impressive job. Now, believe it or not, they actually were going to port this game out earlier for the Atari 2600 of all game systems. Yep. Unfortunately, it didn't get released, but a prototype is floating around, and they did a pretty decent job of it. Now, I discussed that way back when I was discussing the Atari 2600 prototype, so if you haven't seen that episode, please check it out. Did a pretty nice job on this one. Like I said, I was very impressed at the work that went into this and how close it came to the arcade. A+ job for sure. Next up, we have a very groundbreaking arcade game, and that is Gauntlet. This was released in 1985 by Atari Games. And what you do in this one, it's a fantasy adventure maze game where there are 4 different player characters who each have different powers and weapons. The warrior, the elf, the wizard, and the Valkyrie. The 4 players move through mazes searching for various items and killing monsters. The warrior does the most damage, the elf does the least damage but is the fastest, the wizard can do the most damage with potions. The Valkyrie is a good combination of strength and speed. You find potions along the way, you have these... Basically, you're trying to find your way out and get as much treasure as possible. And this game gets difficult very, very quickly. At the time when it came out, I wasn't that good at it, but I still liked playing it because it was one of the first games that I ever saw that had 4 players, up to 4 players simultaneously. In some versions, there were also 2-player versions. It just depended on where the machine was. Alright, in 1988, Tengen released their version for the NES. The graphics are just terrible in my opinion. This looks more like a CGA graphic type game, and if that sounds kind of harsh, it's Tengen. So, really was a disappointment, especially when you seen some really nice ports of Gauntlet over the years, and yeah, this one, the gameplay itself is pretty good, but like I said, just that was about the only part that they got right, because the rest of the game I thought was just ugh. What is your opinion on that? Let me know in the comments section below. And it was so nice that they did it twice. Gauntlet 2 was released in 1986 by Atari Games. Once again, you take on the same 4 players. The only difference with this one is it contains over 100 new mazes with new enemies and variations. And one of the cool parts is that 2 players playing at the same time can be the same characters if they want to. So basically the same game, just ramped it up to 100. In 1990, a port would be released for the NES. Now, thankfully, this time it was not done by Tengen, it was done by Mindscape. But yeah, still, the graphics are not quite up to par. But what's interesting about this port is that you can play 4 players simultaneously. Yep. Now, there was a special add-on called the the NES 4 score that allowed up to 4 players at one time. I'll put that picture up there on the screen. And this was one of those games that took advantage of it. And best of all, just like the arcade game, if you and 3 of your friends all wanted to be the warrior, you could, or any combination of them. So again, it did retain that from the arcade, which made this port, even with the graphics, I still think this was an amazing port for just that reason. And from 1979, we have Galaxian. This was programmed by Namco and published by Coleco. This expanded on the formula pioneered by Space Invaders. As in the earlier game, Galaxian features a horde of attacking aliens that exchange shots with the player. In contrast to Space Invaders, Galaxian added an element of drama by having the aliens periodically make kamikaze-like dives at the player's ship, the Galaxip. That probably is a question that will show up on some trivia sometime. The ship is called the Galaxip. Anyway, really a fun game, one that I played a lot in the arcade, as I was a huge Space Invaders fan, and this just took it to the next level. So anybody who liked Space Invaders, more than likely they love Galaxian. In 1984, Galaxian would receive a port for the Famicom, and as you can see, it is spot on. Actually, excuse me, take that back, 1985, sorry. And as you can see, it is spot on. Amazing job here. Unfortunately, it was not released outside of Japan, so yeah, unfortunately, which is too bad, because it would have been nice to have gotten this game over on this side of the pond, especially for those of us that played this game quite a bit in the arcade. But it was, of course, ported out on other game systems, and in today's world, it's quite easy to get Japan-exclusive games anyway. But overall, like I said, an amazing job that Namco did in porting out this iconic arcade game. And it wasn't for a few years later, actually, in 1981, that Namco would release the sequel to Galaxian, that being Galaga. Now, it's quite similar in a lot of ways. As you are shooting at aliens, there's a few new added features, such as you can shoot more than one bullet at a time. An account of your hit-miss ratio is given at the end of the game, and you have a challenge stage that occurs every few levels, in which a series of enemies fly onto and out of the screen in set patterns without firing at the player's ship or trying to crash into it. So, an amazing game that was even more successful than Galaxian, as back in the late 70s, early 80s, fixed shooter games were all the rage, and after playing this game, you can kind of see why. In 1988, Bandai would release Galaga for the Famicom, and yes, we did get it for the NES. So, as you can see, the graphics and the gameplay are pretty much the same as the arcade, so once again, another spot-on port of a successful arcade game. In 1986, Taito would release an arcade game that I truly suck at, and that is Arkanoid. Now, this is quite similar to Breakout, only big difference is that you have certain kinds of power-ups that you can use in order to keep the ball going. Also, if you suck at this game like me, it's probably because you're trying to play it on MAME. Now, if you ever played the game in the arcade, well, it's a little different story because you actually have a knob that you turn as opposed to playing it with a joystick, which is probably why I suck at it, because like I said, I never actually played this game in the arcade as a boy growing up because it wasn't one that was featured in any of the arcades that I went to. But I did get a chance to play it later on, and I actually did much better at it with the knob than trying to play it on MAME with a joystick. In 1986, they would release a version of Arkanoid for the NES. Now, just like the arcade game, yeah, I sucked at this too. But that's if you purchased it back in the day, it came with its own special controller. Now, I'll put that up on the screen right there. And as you can see, it's quite similar to the arcade controller, in concept anyway. Now, the game itself can be purchased quite readily and for reasonable prices. However, the controller, that is another story. I've seen them start at around $40 and go on up. So if any of you have ever played Arkanoid with the special controller for the NES back in the day, let me know about it in the comments section below, because I was terrible trying to play it with the regular NES controller. So, and our final game for today is a game that I really enjoyed playing, even though I sucked at it really, really bad, and that is Capcom's 1985 platformer scrolling fighter, really freaking hard game, Ghosts and Goblins. So in this game, you take on the role of Sir Arthur and a knight whose girlfriend, Princess Guinevere, has been kidnapped by these evil monsters. So you have to throw lances, axes, and kill zombies, bats, demons, and other foes. And you have to defeat an end-level boss before you can move on to the next stage. And there are 6 of them. And this game is hard. I mean, it gives hard a whole new meaning. I've never beaten this game in any of the formats that it's been found on, but I tell you, it doesn't stop me from trying, because this game is really a lot of fun, and yes, the challenge will always be there. In 1986, a port would be released for the Famicom and NES, and even though, yeah, the graphics did take a little bit of a downturn, the challenge did not. This is probably the most remembered and most revered of all the ports of this game. Most of the time, whenever you see people play this online or discuss it, they're usually discussing the NES port. Again, same thing. Gameplay is just as challenging, just as fun, and just as difficult. If any of you have ever beaten either the arcade or the NES version of this game, let me know about it in the comments section below. I'd really like to meet some people that have actually beaten this game or have made it quite a ways through it, because, you know, there is a big surprise once you think you've beaten the game. So that has really frustrated a lot of people in an already frustrating, but yet still a very fun game. In our next episode, we're going to be taking a little break from the NES, and we're going to be discussing games starring my all-time favorite cartoon character, the Pink Panther. Well, that brings this episode of Classic Gamer 74 to a close. I really hope you all enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed presenting it to you. If you did like it, let me know by giving me a big thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't already, and don't forget to click that little bell icon down there so you'll be notified when I upload any new videos. Connect with me on all my social media platforms. Don't forget to check out my Teespring store to get some really cool Classic Gamer 74 gear and support this channel. Also, check out my Patreon, where you'll find some videos that you will not find anywhere else. Well, until next time, this has been Anthony Gamer, and I will see you all in the next episode. Until next time, be strong, be safe, be happy, be healthy, and above all, take care of each other, be kind to each other, and stop hate of all kinds. See you soon. Bye for now.